A long time ago in a galaxy almost far, far away, four makers unite in order to share and discuss their maker knowledge and some interesting topics along the way. Join us as we light the spark that brings back your childhood in the Almost Star Wars show!
Welcome back, guys, to the Almost Star Wars podcast. I know it's been a while. It really has, but we've all been really busy with, life. But we're back and we're bigger than ever, and we're going to be getting loads more content out to you this year. And as always, I'm James from the Rebel Base, and I'm here with
Ron, otherwise known as CG-RTist.
Dennis with the Black Market Outpost.
Now Brian with the Smugglers.
Good stuff. So it's been a little while. I'm sure we can remember how to do this. We've got a couple of good topics, we think anyway, but we think all our topics are good. And we're going to have a bit of a chat around those. So let's see how it goes, right? The first one is actually something that Brian mentioned to us in the chat. So we've all jumped on it straight away. So I'm going to let Brian introduce the topic, and then we'll all just see where it goes.
So we're going to focus around, is 3D printing making? I'm waiting for lightning to strike me or something awful. That's a subject, right? It's something that the four of us have talked about. I know I've seen it in other forums. I've seen them in comments on YouTube channels, whether it's mine or those of ours. I think it's worth discussing. I think it's worth diving into, because I think there's a little bit of a misconception that if I don't take a piece of foam or styrene or something and cut that up and make something out of it, I'm not, and I go to 3D printing, then I'm not really making something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I was that guy at one point. I really was like totally against 3D printing for the longest time. I just felt like I'm not really doing anything. What am I doing?
What made you feel that way, Dennis? Like what was it about it initially that made you feel that way?
I mean, I guess like on my level, I don't do any of the design work. I don't, it's somebody else's print per se, Thingiverse or wherever I get it from. What am I really doing? Printing it out and painting by number? I guess that's kind of what led me down that path where like, I don't, it's just, not that I wouldn't use maybe a part or something like that here or there to boost whatever I'm working on or whatnot, but like to try to use a whole 3D print, get it and go.
Yep.
Like I did that Mandalorian armor's helmet, and that was a full 3D print. And when I made that video, I really had a hard time putting that out. That was one of the very first things I put out where it was 100% 3D print per se, where really all I did was, show the finished work, like the Bondo, the patching, the painting and whatnot.
Yeah.
So then
you were really
fighting. Where I started to realize that even back in the day, right, the Stormtrooper helmet, it was vacuum formed. They still used a machine. It wasn't like nobody carved it out of wood or foam or whatever. So I kind of slowly try to take that into consideration and lean towards, like Brian always says, using it more as a tool, which is basically what it is.
Yeah. I think you nailed the essence of what has bothered me about this subject. I'm trying not to get overly passionate about it, because it really does, like, it, for whatever reason, it got under my skin several times over the last year as I've started doing more with 3D prints. And it's that essence that it's a tool. I think there's a fair amount of people that get hung up on the cost of it, the price of a 3D printer or the price of filament, and I've seen that kind of generate that conversation. And yet I'll turn and I'll say, well, let's say you make everything out of scratch from wood. Well, I know a table saw is not an inexpensive thing. There are inexpensive versions of them. I've had everything from the $79 Sears Craftsman table saw that when you put a piece of wood on, you're afraid the whole thing's just going to fall over and tap you, right? And then, the table saw I own today, it was about $500. So there's that misconception that, well, 3D printing is expensive. It can be inexpensive, and then it can be very expensive, just like anything else that you use as far as a tool in your shop.
Yeah.
I think I used to feel that way too. I've heard, oh, you're cheating, of course, James and I, we kind of make our own stuff and then print that out, which, that's a whole nother story. So then going back to what you said about printing somebody else's stuff out, like from Thingiverse or something, I think it changes for people like us that just model our own stuff, but not everybody does that. And I get that. So I would use it as a tool, or I would say it's a tool as well, because you can use it in mixed mediums. You can make some 3D printed stuff, add foam to it, add wood. And then once you spray paint it, as you know, with kit bashing and all, it all, everything gels together anyway. So again, it's just another tool, just like a CNC laser, they do the same things. They cut wood, do it a little differently, but still it's a tool all the same.
Yeah. And James, you teach this. I mean, you teach 3D work at university, right? I mean, that's what you do for a day job.
That's it. Yeah. It's a really interesting subject because there's multiple ways of looking at it, isn't there? And I know I use the word perception quite a bit, but I think it is about that. It's about how you perceive the 3D as a tool, isn't it? And whether or not that sits right with you. And like Dennis was saying, even though I 3D model myself, I still didn't do 3D for a long time in my props because I used to feel that it was maybe more interesting to just grab a bunch of stuff and make things. But it was always so tantalizing to be able to model something and print it out. So as soon as I got a resin printer and I could get that really tiny detail, hell yeah, I was all over it because it's just so detailed and such a great technology. But I think the hang up is not necessarily understanding that it is okay, because there's so much content out there right now. Oh, it's been content out there for a long time. I can remember looking on Thingiverse, years ago, and seeing lightsaber pieces that people had made. And I remember having a really old kit built filament printer back then, and it was really bad. It had really thick print lines and it just looked awful. But I remember just chucking everything through it, not for part of the show, but just for just for the likes. And it was amazing technology. But I remember thinking it wasn't really so much as a finished product when it came off the printer. There was a lot more to do with it. Right. And I think for me, when resin became a thing, it became a lot more attractive to me because I'm just lazy when it comes to sanding and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, the stuff that comes off here, it's like finished, almost. I mean, it's beautiful. But yeah, I think it's interesting because, like you said, Ron, I know we do a lot of modeling, and I know I think, in fact, I know, Brian, you do as well. I think, Dennis, you're just starting to play with 3D modeling. But the beauty of it is to just be able to think about it, model it, and print it. And you can prototype something so quickly. You can think about something in a day, model it, print it out by Saturday, and there it is, it's done. And that's awesome. And that's so useful when you're a prop builder, isn't it? Because yes, you've got all that awesome content that's out there, but you can model it too. And that's the bit there that I think is the crux. Is it's a tool.
Yep.
Is it making? Yes. Is it making if you just download it, somebody else's work, and print it? Yes, because we all know there's a hell of a lot more to it than just press and print.
The whole philosophy of a shop for me is every tool is a means to an end. I'm not obsessed with 3D printing to be obsessed with 3D printing. It's a tool to help me get from point A to point B. It's the same way I look at laser cutters, table saws, jigsaws, any of that stuff. I don't get hung up on the actual tool itself. Yeah.
And also, I think the people that comment, let's get down to what we're talking about here is feedback that we may have had from the community on our own content, but there's also just the general feeling that's out there. I think a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, that feeling comes from people that just haven't tried it. A little bit like me with an airbrush, that kind of thing. And I think it's easier to say, well, it's cheating because you haven't done anything, you just printed it out. Well, I don't know. I think if you tried it, you'd realize it's about how you align the print on the print bed, getting your print bed just right, getting the type of filament or resin that you're going to use, and all the prep and afterwards. It's just there's so much to it, and that's why people get congratulated when they do a good print. like, oh man, that's awesome. How have you done that? You know, and it becomes a thing in itself
Yeah.
to print somebody else's work, but to print it well. You know,
Right.
people are massive on YouTube for printing stuff well and haven't even 3D modeled a thing themselves. And that's fine, because there is an art to printing it well.
Yeah.
There is. I mean, you don't just download something, send it to a printer like you would, you know, paper and print, and it just works. I mean, anyone who's done any type of printing knows that there's the leveling of the print bed. What happens when it fails? You know, how can you fix it, or can you? Obviously, you got to do sanding afterwards, unless resin, and even resin sometimes would need some sanding.
Yeah. Sure.
And then
Yeah.
where it really shines is how are you going to finish it? Are you just going to leave it as the gray, like K2SO there? Or are you going to, you know, sand it, get the print lines out, and then paint it, weather it, and make it look like, you know, close to screen accurate, or just something completely off the wall but look good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
I mean,
there's a fair amount of people out there right now. It's especially true in the tabletop gaming community.
Mm.
I'm pretty addicted to watching a lot of that, because I like the painting techniques. I can sit there and watch someone paint a miniature that was 3D printed, and I don't ever sit there and go, well, you know, it's cheating because he 3D printed that, or she 3D printed that. Why that would be any different than they went to a model store and bought a miniature, put the model kit together, and then painted it.
Yeah.
I guess I just don't get hung up on that the same.
Which
Yeah.
is
That's
a
what I meant.
different
That's what I
topic.
meant earlier about perceptions. Is it depends about the media you start with, right? If you grab a piece of wood, let's say I go and buy a massive piece of MDF, which doesn't really happen, not often. Foam maybe, but I've got a nice piece of MDF, and I'm going to put a panel on the wall. I might just cut another piece of MDF just a little bit smaller all the way around and put that on top of the first panel, and they know I've got an inset panel. What have I actually done though? I've just got two rectangular pieces of material,
Right.
sandwiched them together and put them on the wall. Am I cheating because it was already rectangular when I purchased it? No, because I've created something else. And that's the same thing. You know, you're taking whatever off of the print bed that may have been made by you, or it may have been made by somebody else. Well, the MDF panel was made by somebody else, right? You know, and the same as a polystyrene block. It's a starting point, and it's just a modern tool.
Yeah, agreed.
That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. Like, I mean, my style is gather, find it, make it, build it. But I find tremendous amount of help coming from the 3D printer, especially with greeblies or a certain part that needs to fit somewhere. You're just not going to find it. You go to the 3D printer, you shrink it down, you enlarge it, you do whatever you need to do, you print it out, and you still got to do the cleanup work, and then you apply it to your project. So, I mean, it's a tremendous tool. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm right now, I'm running 4 of them in here, and I was totally against it 12 months
See
ago.
what happens?
It's like a
Yeah.
tattoo. Once you get one, you want
Yeah,
more.
I mean, there's 4 of them in here right now.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
you
have
got me
this
squeezing
really
my
weird- sorry.
you got me squeezing my stress Monday so much that I need to buy another 3 printers now.
I have this
think,
really strange story that may not seem like it's connected to this conversation, but it's been on my mind for like 2 weeks. During the holiday, my wife and I took an actual vacation, and we like a lot of History Channel type stuff. And we were watching a series. It was something about the Temple of the Monkey God, Lost Temple of the Monkey God. And what it was is there was a pair of guys that had set out to use technology to go and discover hidden cities and temples in the jungle, and they're going to use LiDAR technology. I believe that this was right around 2015, and no one had done it. So they put the LiDAR system in a plane, and they fly over an area, and lo and behold, they find this temple. They find a city complex, massive city complex that you'd never be able to see on the ground. And actually, when they ultimately went to the site, it was like nothing was there. It was completely covered. So the point of this is the archaeologists, that community, they hammered these guys, calling them treasure hunters and treasure seekers, and that this wasn't archaeology, and so on. And throughout this whole episode, this series, this documentary, you're learning that these two guys that are just really interested in finding lost cities are pretty much being attacked by the archaeology community as a whole, because they're not, I guess, not out there with a tiny brush and a little pick and just scrounging through the dirt to find these temples. Even though they didn't disrupt anything, they brought, once they found the site, they brought an archaeologist with them. They went through all the proper channels to help uncover this place. And now, and I can't remember the country that it was in, but now the country itself is excavating what they believe to be a 20-year project. So as we're watching this, I look to my wife and I say, that's 3D printing. That's laser cutters right now. Because a traditional from scratch builder might look at someone that's doing 3D printing and say, that's not making, that's using technology. And, you know, there's that how dare you consider yourself a maker if you're going to do that. And it's funny because you don't see, I just saw the correlation in that story with these guys that were trying to use a technology that was new and not really understood to help solve problems or help further discovery. And I look at 3D printing in much of the same way. Okay, there's my story.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense and that was somewhat interesting.
Totally makes sense. And you know, you said earlier about me being a teacher and teaching this stuff, and I see that every day. I see learners that come through the door that are scared to use 3D, scared to therefore output their 3D models to a 3D printer, but go on that journey and use the technology, and then by the end of the course learn something new. Because this doesn't just happen in schools and colleges, it happens, you know, in the community as well, with people. I hear it a lot. People, I finally took the plunge and bought a resin printer because I like printing out little characters for my tabletop game or for my 375 series or whatever, you know. And it's making people jump more because it's such a tantalizing technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it just really an evolution of a tool, isn't it?
Yep.
Right.
I mean, we're not still using a screwdriver, right? Everybody's got a drill with a flat head tip on it.
Screwdriver.
Or, you know, like I said earlier when I referenced the Stormtrooper's helmet, those were all done on a vacuum former. Nobody sat there and whittled that out of wood.
Yeah. And getting a vacuum former to this day is still a complicated process or an expensive process.
Yeah.
But yet if you used a vacuum former on a lot of your projects, I think you would have less people reacting to that's not making, right? Even though in that scenario you make a buck, so you have to physically make the buck and then you make the vacuum former.
Right.
Well, not really any different than 3D printing. You have to model it.
Yeah, you're exactly. You're still you're making a virtual buck.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
I like to think of this as when you think back to the early days of Lucasfilm Limited, for example, when, and I know I've said this kind of thing before, but where the guys are all together, guys and girls all together in the garages, and they're making stuff in workshops, but they're not just making ships and droids and props. They're making the tools to help them make the ships, droids, and props and make them better. Right. And one of my favorite stories or favorite kind of technologies to come out of that is the motion capture system, the Dijkstra Flex. And you know, that is something that was custom made to make capturing the same thing several times in exactly the same way, so that they could capture, you know, a spaceship flying past the camera, or the camera flying past the spaceship, should I say, and do that in multiple passes. You know, they kind of pioneered that whole motion control system. Now, was that cheating? Was that replacing the camera operator? Well, in fact, it was replacing the camera operator for those moves, because the camera was being operated by the machine. But just look at the fundamental impact that had on cinema from that point forward, you know. And where
you're on target when it comes to Star Wars, right? Because you're talking about pioneering something in the initial movies, and then Lucas does it again at the prequel, where he adopts CG, and in a lot of people's opinion, I'm not shy about saying it, that sort of ruined those movies for me in some respect, because it was all about it. It was like, I got a new tool and now I'm going to use it for everything.
Yeah.
But it taught like the movie makers a lesson that has now, you take someone like Peter Jackson, who referenced the prequel Star Wars as being a pioneer in the technology, took CG along with all those model makers and miniature makers and costume makers and combined that world together. And now you had something in Lord of the Rings that was completely different and almost seamless, using the technology to make something better.
Yeah, totally. And there was another invention as well. I think it was called the Droid, and I don't mean the droids as in the Star Wars droids, but the Droid. It was an editing desk. I think it was something that George used to use quite a bit, and it was something that allowed, I don't really know the tech behind it, but allowed him to splice multiple camera reels together, you know, and edit quicker. But then a lot of the process was automated, and I guess that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? And I always remember that line from, I think it was Star Trek 6, where Kim Cattrall said, or she explained, that could have been Chekhov actually, explained the wooden shoe thing, the wooden sabot. I always remember that, sabotage, because that was why back in the Industrial Revolution, you know, jobs were being replaced and workers used to throw their wooden shoes called sabot into the machines, hence the word sabotage, because they didn't like automation. Now, I don't know whether that's a real story. I just remember being quoted in Star Trek. But this is what we're talking about, isn't it? We're talking about automation, you know, 3D printing, laser cutting, all of those things. So we've kind of almost touched on this already. We've merged into our next topic, and that is around the whole thing of tools, not just 3D, you know, laser cutters versus the jigsaw, for example. And there's lots of comparisons we can draw here, and improvements, and maybe some disadvantages perhaps to the finished product. Who knows? Let's have a chat about that.
Yeah.
I think when you compare the two, again, tools, you know, a tool is a tool. They all cut wood. The only little comparison I would say is a hand tool, you know, the cost of it and the ease of getting into it versus the cost of a CNC or a laser and all that goes with it. Because it's not just buying one tool, but now you have to have fume extractors because you don't want to smell the burnt stuff. You got to have your glasses, you know, and depending on the laser, you know, especially if it's CO2, now you have to have chillers, and there's a lot that goes into it versus I have a jigsaw. I will cut this piece of wood and that is the end of it. So, you know, convenience, ease of use, it's a toss up, you know?
Yeah, I mean, convenience, ease of use. We're in a I want it now society, right? A CNC machine, for example, is going to give you 10 parts in the time you cut one.
It's true.
It's going to be 100% more accurate. There's a place for it. You know, on our hobby level, yeah, I would love to have one. I don't, but I would love to have one. And I'd probably use it more than I would my jigsaw if I had one. But I mean, yeah, there's no doubt. It's convenience, it's ease of use. It's where our society's going. If not, we'd still be running, you know, belt-driven whatever to drill a hole in a piece of wood.
Steam
right?
power.
Yeah, steam power. There you go.
You have two fundamentally different camps when it comes to these conversations about this that I've seen. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong. But you have the camp of makers that say, if I don't build it from scratch, meaning from a scratch piece by hand, then I'm not really making. And then you have the other group that is, well, you know, I can't afford X CNC laser. And don't get me wrong, a laser is an expensive piece of hardware. I know there are inexpensive hobby lasers and desktop lasers that don't have a lot of power, that are not astronomically expensive. But I bought a Glowforge. It wasn't cheap, no question about it. But I didn't buy it to cheat. I bought it because my skill level with a hand tool like a jigsaw or something, to be able to get the machine quality look of something I wanted, was why I bought it. It wasn't even really about the speed. It was more, I want this thing to be absolutely perfect. And that was the reason I went down that path. And you guys know me, I use it for everything. If I could cook with it, I probably would, because I love the machine.
You can cook with a laser.
You can definitely cut your food with a laser.
Yeah, you can engrave cookies. I mean, like, it's just, Yeah. It's just I got obsessed with the perfection I could get with it that I couldn't get elsewhere. But I don't just pack up the rest of my tools and go home and just use that alone.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
For me, having like you guys as well, having skills with the software, it was the opportunity to be able to iterate very quickly my ideas. And I think what it's done for me, or certainly what the resin printer did for me in the laser cutter, was it enabled me to get to my end goal a bit quicker, and actually just get to my end goal. Because I think beforehand, if I'd have think about a jigsaw, for example, if I'd have put, a lot of time into doing something with a jigsaw, and it took me some time to do, I would just settle with the outcome, because I couldn't be bothered to do it again. Right. So I'm like, there you go, I'm done, it's fine. I'll fill it with some wood glue and some sawdust and sand it afterwards. It's all good. Whereas with a laser cutter, and yeah, okay, you've got the expense of the media that you're using, but you actually don't really need to press cut until you've got it just right in your program and you're iterating it. And yeah, there's an argument that you can still iterate plans and still use those for hand tools. Absolutely. But I found myself going through that process of iteration more and more, particularly more with 3D printing than lasering, because I will spend hours in my 3D printer. I made like a little hinge I've been working on some miniature dioramas. One of the ones I've been working on at the moment is the Book of Boba Fett's Bacta tank, and there's a little lid that opens up in there, and I spent ages playing around with that mechanism. How was I going to make that work, but also how was I going to make it so that people could put it together afterwards, or I could put it together afterwards. Had I just gone straight to a scratch build thing, I'd have probably come up with something that was okay and it worked all right. And maybe even a while back with 3D modeling, I'd have just modeled something and thought I'm going to go with that, but I've actually printed it out 3 or 4 times to try it, because it's so quick, particularly the smaller pieces I'm working with. And that iteration just makes for a better product at the end, as you were saying, Brian. It just makes it better. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Rapid prototyping, that's what they call it, isn't it?
Yeah, rapid prototyping. But you just, in my opinion, you've just nailed it home. All the iteration is the making process. You made it. Because it was built virtually first. That's irrelevant. It still was making. At the end of the day, there's a physical thing that you created, and you just use different steps to get there. It's no different than someone that maybe would draft something out and do several drawings before they built a cabinet.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But then it's also opening up a world of opportunity to the everyday maker. To be able to have these tools in your home and do all these things. It's just amazing. I remember when on the cusp of 3D printing, having been in that sort of education sector for a while, and when it was all coming out, and our first set of learners in 2016, they all had a 3D printer that they built themselves as part of the course, which was great. And I remember thinking, this is really crazy that one of the pieces was missing, so they just 3D printed it on one of the other printers, and it was just such a great concept. You can reproduce itself, which I think is one of the conditions for being alive, is it, to be able to reproduce. But it's amazing that we can do that, and so well and so quick now, or so accurately.
Yeah, I love being able to come in the shop and I'm working on a project, scratch building a project even, and realizing that I need something that finishes it off. It may be something as simple as I need a different way to mount. Actually, when we built the start of our beer tap rail, and that had the IG-88 head, like the cantina thing, right? I needed something to mount basically the beer tap to this PVC pipe. And I was able to take a few measurements, jump into Fusion 360, model a very simple bracket, 3D print it, and install it in the same day. And it was completely custom for what I needed. I didn't ever stop to think, well, if I use this 3D printer, boy, someone in the comments of this video is just going to give me a hard time for doing it. And sure enough, it happened. Like, well, I wish you would have gone to Home Depot and found 3 different parts and bolted them together and made it that way instead of 3D printing it. I just think there's a mental block about how you get to the end result. And oftentimes I think it's either because you're in the camp of, it wasn't scratch built, or you're in the camp of,
Yeah.
I couldn't afford that, you know.
But you know, even going to Home Depot, as you guys call it, and buying other bits, those pieces have still been made and manufactured as well by somebody else.
Right.
So it's you know, it is a perception thing. It's purely a perception thing.
Yeah.
It also could be that someone just wants to follow along and they haven't made that jump to the 3D printing or laser,
Yeah.
you know, that we just don't
Absolutely.
have those tools. And I was with you so far, right up until that point when you did that. Now I'm lost and I'm stuck here. Now I have to figure it out, you know, which that is
You know what?
making in and of itself, is figuring it out.
Yeah. As a maker, though, if you're following along and you don't have that part, that's where you take that next step.
Mhm.
Go make that
Improvise.
part. Go find
Yeah.
something that'll fit. Go to Home Depot and buy the 3 brackets, put them together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's all part of making.
Yeah.
What works for Brian doesn't work for me. What works for James doesn't work for you, and so on.
Yep.
That's part of it. I think.
Mhm.
I think so too. I think you're right, Dennis. I think there's a constant battle that I think all of us face in our hobbies that we use on our channels where we build things. And that's, you want other people to get excited about whatever it is that you've done so that they go try it. And as soon as you introduce one of these complex tools, you are going to alienate a select group of the audience or groups of makers. Dennis makes awesome lightsabers, and he does them on a metal lathe. I don't have a metal lathe, but I could watch you make one of those, Dennis. Super excited, and then drive to the big box stores and buy a bunch of plumbing parts off the shelf and assemble that and make some modifications. I'm not angry at you and randomly typing in the comments how mad I am that you have a metal lathe. I'm just getting excited about what you're doing, and that's giving me ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how does it go? We're not screen accurate.
Right. That's
I'll have it. I'm gonna make it.
Pretty much.
I mean, you know, we say all of this stuff as well, and I'm totally behind everything we've said about this. But of course, what we're not doing, we're not taking away from the people that don't use these tools.
Oh.
I mean, so I know, Brian, me and you, we were chatting with Tony the other day on his channel from Docking Bay 327 about our Falcon benches. And Tony is a really great example of a dude with a jigsaw that has done amazing things and is making much quicker progress than I am with his room. So, you know, we say these things when we're not taking away at all in any way from the people that don't use tool or haven't jumped fully on the bandwagon with that stuff yet. But there is, as you've said several times, there is just a select kind of part of the community that does tend to give, I'm going to be honest, give people a hard time over using these tools, which is kind of strange. I guess I can understand it. It's a perception thing. People are almost not afraid of the technology. They just don't get it. And it seems like such a big mountain to climb. And I think we've all felt like that at one point about the technology we've used. I mean, I remember, Brian, you hitting me up in the comments about using resin printing when I was playing with it, you know, and I'd only just learned it too. So everybody has a starting point, but I think we all just have to appreciate that there's multiple ways of doing things. And whether there's automation involved or whether there's a modern tool involved, you're still creating something. You're still being creative. Absolutely.
It simply goes back to whether you find the particular shape you need or you go out and print it. It's still the same shape. You're still using it for the same purpose. It's just a matter of where and how you get your material and your building products.
I would love all of you that are watching, just give us some feedback in the comments. Like, walk us through, are you a fan of it or are you not? Whether it's 3D printing or laser cutting or automation in general. And if you are, how'd you get past that hurdle? If you're not a fan of it, tell us why. I genuinely want to understand that, because as we cultivate our projects, I'm always trying to think of who can do what I'm doing, or while I'm doing it this way, if I'm using a 3D printer or a laser or whatever it is, what alternatives can I present so that someone else could do something?
Yep. I'm always thinking of that when I make something with the CNC. Is like, okay, if I did not have a CNC, how would I make this exact same thing? And how often it's a jigsaw or just a router. A lot more time involved in you know, precision, but it can be done. You know, I've even like kind of warred with myself inside, like, okay, should I make this with that tool, you know, just to please the audience or show it can be done, or should I just do this and that's the end of it and just mention you could do this with that tool? And because this is, I mean, I'm not just making this for YouTube. This is stuff I actually want. I opt for the tool that I spent the money for and I use it, and then just explain, if you don't have this, this is how you might accomplish it. So
yeah, I mean, I got my Tatooine diorama, same thing. On video, I'm actually cutting with a knife, and then it dawned on me, there's a bandsaw right behind me. I instantly turned around and I cut all my shapes out right on the bandsaw, and it, you know, 10 seconds I was done.
Yep.
But it's just sometimes you just don't even, like, you get set in your ways and you just do it that way. Or, hey, I saw Brian cut it with a knife, so that's how I'm going to do it. Right. And then halfway through, I'm like, oh, there's a bandsaw right there. I'm going to start using that.
Right.
I didn't use the bandsaw because it was in the corner and there was a bunch of stuff. Out of it.
And I've been there before, where you know you could get it done in like 5 minutes. You just but you look at the tool and it's like covered or buried, and you're like,
But it's interesting. It's interesting that it's become a thing that we apologize for it in our videos, and not just us. I see it in videos all the time. Where the maker says, you know, I've used a laser cutter, but you could do this with a craft knife, you know, and it's kind of funny that that's become a thing that people say, because we do know, everyone's conscious that it can upset people.
Yeah. I know with the laser cutter, it always, in those comments and those exchanges, it really comes down to how expensive it is. I'm not like a super wealthy person. We saved for probably 4 years to get enough to be able to do that. I worked side jobs and different things to buy it. So you're right, James. It almost bothers me sometimes that I'm hesitant to use it because it might offend somebody that I did.
But you spent that money for it, so I mean, this was the reason I bought the thing. I want to use it.
I want to use it. Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you go. We've all done now being angry about this topic. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. We've all had a bit of a conversation around this, and it's interesting, and it's great to hear all of your opinions and views on that. And as Brian said, we'd love to hear from you in the comments as well, because this is a topic. It does kind of generate lots of conversation, and you know, as I said before, we're not in any way bashing people that don't use these tools, because there's wonderful things happening out there. We've got over 10,000 members of the Room Builders group, and there's lots and lots of people using both automated tools and non-automated. So it's a great topic, and it's a great healthy discussion. So we'd love to hear more from you. Anyway, we're going to bring it to a close there. So guys, thank you so much for watching the show and listening to the show, and we're definitely going to be back with some more.